This is The Late Show with Genevieve Bent on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening. It's 8 p.m. Welcome to The Late Show. I'm Genevieve Bent and I'm here with you until 9:30 p.m. this evening. Coming up, we'll be discussing Windrush Day 2021 and the legacy of Windrush in the UK and in education. It's Thursday evening. This is Teachers Talk Radio and we are live.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Genevieve Bent on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Okay, and good evening. Thank you to those of you entering the live studio. Good evening. Happy Thursday. Hope you're having a lovely Thursday evening. The rain has let up, so it's not too bad around where I am. The sun is out, and it's still pretty mild, I'd say. But before we get into the show, please do text in and let me know that you're listening, that you're here this evening. Good evening to Oisin. Thank you for joining me this evening, Oisin. You heard him, as I say, every show. Tune in, talk it out. You heard the man. It's at TT Radio 2021. So get involved and follow us, connect with us at TT Radio 2021 on Twitter. You can follow the hashtag TT Radio. And of course, you can connect with me personally at Vive Wright. So we are all here to speak with you this evening. And, to connect with you guys and let us know your thoughts. What are your current thoughts on the trends in education? Remember, you can call into any of the live shows and you can actually win a Teachers Talk Radio mug. And I don't have one yet. And I said this last week that I'd really like to claim my one, really like to get my own one. Don't have it just yet, but I'm going to get it. And I'm going to take a picture and I'm going to make sure that it's, I've tagged TT Radio 2021, I've put the hashtag in and I've shared it on Twitter. So yes, call in, win a mug. Hopefully you enjoy the show. And if you've got any thoughts that you want to add to tonight's discussion, please do call in, let me know, text in and share the show. Thank you to Sobia who has shared the live show. She is one of my fellow colleagues on Teachers Talk Radio. She has her own wonderful show, so please do log on to. In fact, if you haven't before, we have got an amazing website run by the executive and Mal, who's doing amazing things. Go onto the website, have a look at all the hosts on there, all my colleagues who are running their own amazing shows, and we've all got our own shows and own schedules. So yeah, please do go and have a look, check it out. So it's Thursday evening. Now, I know last week was like the tags deadline. So a lot of people sort of, we breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief. But of course, tags isn't over. And this week was pretty much a week of anticipation for a lot of teachers, particularly for heads of departments and exam departments, because, there's in some ways I won't say it's just as bad, but, there are, in some ways, it is quite a significant week as well, because we've all been waiting for sampling requests, whether that's coming through. So we've put all our evidence together, we've submitted all of those grades, and now it's like the waiting game. And if you've been on Edu Twitter, you would have seen so many people have been sharing their stories. And AQA actually came out with that tweet, didn't they? Or it was a tweet, or it was I can't remember how they came out of it, but I saw it on Twitter and it was about an apology about the 48 hours deadline. So I know that has been that's been crazy in itself. So it's not just last week wasn't the end of it. This week has been like the extension. I can't even speak. I'm so tired. The extension week of the tags. And where I am, we do not just the general qualifications, but also vocational, and some exam boards obviously doing their own thing in that way. So there's been anticipation from both sides, really, just speaking from my experience. And I can see people entering the live show. Good evening to you. If you are entering, please do text in, just say hello. And of course, if you've got any thoughts this evening, do share them with me and with the listeners. Yes, I'm just talking about tags, and I just want to thank everyone who's been involved with tags in my department anyway. Obviously, well done to everyone who's been involved, but in my department, literally couldn't have done it without any of you guys. And Naomi has texted in saying hello. Hello, Naomi. Good evening. I know that you've been involved highly in tags, so massive thank you to you. So it's 8 minutes past 8, and of course, this week's show is all about one of my favorite celebrations of the year, and that is Windrush Day. And I said this last week, so I don't know if anyone was on who's listening this week was listening to last week's show or has listened back at any point. But Windrush Day is one of my favorite celebrations, and I would say it's fairly surprising given how new a celebration it is, or new a day it is, because it's only been going 4 years. This year is 4 years, so it hasn't been going very long at all. But in that time, I just feel, it's been something that's been important to me personally anyway, just talking about the Windrush generation. But now that it is, it's an official commemoration, I just think it's so important to even if you don't do anything for it, just to share it and recognize it, and I guess celebrate and recognize the achievements of everyone who was involved in that initial wave of migration from the West Indies, and what has made UK society what it is now. So yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite celebrations. And for anyone who's listened to my show before, that I'm big on identity, and I just, my identity, I've said it so many times, it is Black British, West Indian, Black British, Caribbean. So of course, this is something that means a lot to me personally. Hello to Anna, who has texted in this evening. I hope you're having a lovely evening, Anna. Thank you for joining me this evening. So Windrush Day. So like I said, it has only been 4 years since this has been marked as an actual commemoration in the UK. And it came about because of Patrick Vernon, OBE. So I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Patrick Vernon, but he's a political campaigner. He's an activist. He was once a councillor for Hackney, for the borough of Hackney. And, he's big on, I guess, he's comes from a Black British West Indian background himself. And he has been big on ensuring that, the Windrush generation isn't forgotten, that their contributions aren't forgotten. And so he campaigned for this really to happen. He campaigned for Windrush Day to be a thing. And his campaign took on traction to the point where, it reached the House of Parliament, and it became an official day, essentially. And he first launched a petition around Windrush Day in 2013. And then he followed that up with a campaign in 2018. Now, for anyone who is familiar with Windrush and, current affairs, you'll know that Windrush now, even just saying that, or Windrush generation, is synonymous with the Windrush scandal. The Windrush scandal of 2017, of course. And I guess it's ongoing, but it first came to light in 2017. And so he followed up his campaign, or his petition, with this campaign at the height of the Windrush scandal. And so with everything that was going on at the time, official backing was then given to it, from MPs, where people were supporting that. They wanted to back it. They wanted Windrush Day to be official. And finally, it was announced by the government in 2018 that annual Windrush Day would be celebrated. And the day, obviously, for anyone who is familiar with Windrush Day, you will, and I've not stopped talking about it on Twitter, on all my social media, actually. It's on the 22nd of June. And that's obviously significant because 22nd of June, 1948 was when the Empire Windrush docked in the UK in Tilbury in Essex. So, of course, it makes sense that that's the day that it would be celebrated. And So it's 73 years since Empire Windrush docked. And in 73 years, you just think about how much of a contribution to society that these West Indian migrants made, and how how much they tolerated and put up with and was subject to, while still making all of these positive contributions to society. And like I said, or like I have said to students, or to, I guess, even just speaking about in my family, this is wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. And of course, it's so important to just keep that legacy alive, because even when Windrush generation passes on, that legacy will still be there, and we can still celebrate the diversity of the history of Britain, essentially. And this year in particular was a really great one, because the government, obviously with everything going on, the Windrush scandal, that obviously can't be ignored, but there was a pot of money that was a grant, so it was an official Windrush grant that of £500,000, so £500,000, granted to different community projects, whether it be schools or official organizations or charities, and anyone could really apply for money in this grant. So that's great. Yeah, and that's something to be celebrated, truly. So the purpose of Windrush Day, essentially, like I've said, I've said it already, it is to encourage, the celebration of Windrush generation and the descendants, of course, people like my grandparents, and then my mum and dad, or my aunties and uncles, the first generation of Black British Caribbean, Black British West Indian. And this is really a time for communities, whether it be a school community or an actual community, local community, to really celebrate that and allow them to come together and acknowledge and recognize everything that's going on. And of course, each year now it's grown, this Windrush Day, 4 years in, it's grown to be something that is actually becoming more prestigious and more nationally recognized, and lots more things going on, a real celebration and appreciation of a group of people, a large group of people. And there's been all sorts going on. If you are listening, of course, and you have celebrated Windrush in any way, please do text in and let me know. And yeah, share with us. And I put that question out on Twitter earlier, and I got a couple of responses and some really nice shared stories of what people did, including a massive festival, which I replied to because it sounds really, really good, and something that I think our school, for those of you who are, anyone who's listening that is part of that, is one of my colleagues, I think it's something that our school would really benefit. But I work in Croydon, and there has been a massive Black British Caribbean community. So lots of the students in our school do have that heritage and are familiar with that, and I think appreciate the acknowledgement and that recognition of that and bringing it to the forefront. So the National Day is about more than just one moment in history. It's about the ongoing contributions and the ongoing changes to society that Windrush made, that migration made. So how did you celebrate? Now, last year was the first time that we celebrated or brought recognition to Windrush Day, I'm going to be honest. And at that time, the feedback from students was that many of them didn't know much about the Windrush generation, didn't know the term Windrush generation as such, but lots of them were familiar with the music that was, a part of, I guess, that migration era, the music or the food, or Brixton is just down the road, so possibly going to Brixton, and obviously the Caribbean community, ska music, lovers rock music. And we have done a school assembly 2 years in a row now, which I believe has been, well received for the most part. And this year in particular, with lots of music recorded into the assembly. And I can see I've got a caller. And I would love a caller to break up, everything that I'm saying. But yes, caller, please do call in. Oh, hello.
Oh, can you hear me, miss?
I can hear you, miss. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Nice to hear your voice, Blessing.
Good to hear yours again today.
Yeah, it might be for you, but for me, it's yeah, I'm used to hearing my voice. So, um, thank you for calling in. This is the second time you've called in now, and I don't know. Are we going to get you a mug? I'm not sure. Is that allowed? I'll have to
I
wait
have to.
on.
I have to say, I'm very disappointed because I didn't get my mug last time. So, you know,
Listen, really? I'm so sorry.
I'm just exposing you online. That's how, just,
I know. Talk
expose
about
you.
bring shame to my name. Um, Tom has texted in and said, "You can have the mug. You both can." Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Blessing. We'll make sure that that gets sorted. That's my fault, if anything. And yeah, we'll get that sorted. And Tom has said, "Dreams can be made." Tom is a dream maker. Thank you, Tom. Much appreciated. So hello and happy belated Windrush, Blessing.
Happy Windrush. I don't think I saw you on the day, so happy Windrush. I know it's like this is your favorite, one of your favorite days to celebrate. So I know it means a lot to you, and it means a lot to all of us at our community as well, especially being in Croydon and so close to Brixton. It is really important for us,
Yeah,
especially
yeah,
without Notting Hill for the past 2 years. Which I
yes,
think for me as a non-Caribbean person, I see Notting Hill as like the pinnacle of celebration of the Caribbean. I feel like that's when the Caribbean is like, I don't know, I feel like London becomes the
mm,
Caribbean for a
yeah,
moment in time. So I just feel like the last 2 years, because of COVID, Windrush Day is so important to not only the Caribbean community, but for those of us that are not from that community to kind of remember their experiences and that it was not that long ago. Like we're talking about your grandmother and your grandfather,
yeah,
Genevieve. We're talking about people that you see every week and talk to all the time. And this was literally their experience. And I know
yeah,
we see a lot of photographs in black and white, but actually it's not that long ago, So I'm so happy that we're celebrating it more as a country, a society, and a community. I'm so excited about what it can become and what it will become.
yeah, definitely. It is very exciting, and I think it's definitely gaining more traction over time. And I think that it's a really good opportunity for schools to be able to, I guess, acknowledge that, and not just in history, but across the school and in wider school discussion. Definitely. And
Mm.
how have you recognised or celebrated Windrush this year, Blessing?
Well, in our school, last 2 years, we've done that through assembly because we can't all be together. We can't mix bubbles, obviously. We can't come together for a mass celebration. So we've done it through assembly, but the assembly's been fantastic because I feel like it's so inclusive in the sense that it gives children the history of it. Like children really come away with the history of Windrush and the reason why the Windrush generation came over. But I think the beauty of how the spin that we put on it in our school, knowing that so many of our kids are from that background, is the music and what the
Mm,
music has brought to British culture. And just the fact that, like, you were there then yesterday, Jen. We had a celebration for our year 11s,
mm,
and just the music we were listening to, and obviously our Jamaican teachers. I remember Miss was going, "Do you not know this song too?" I was like, "Yeah, like we grew up with this music," and it kind of gave me pause to kind of think, like, "Oh my gosh, like I know these songs and I know these artists, these Caribbean
yeah,
artists." And it's just like it's a part of who I am. Like I remember being 3, 4, dancing to those same songs. I'm a Nigerian girl from a Nigerian household, but we listen to Caribbean music. Like
mm,
Bob Marley was like the bit my mum's favorite, my ultimate. It's just I mean we still listen to him at parties today. Like it's not a party if he's not playing. So I just think about how much it is just embedded into so many of our kind of like lifestyles. And yeah, so our assembly really focuses on the music, but also just like accomplishments across political spheres, literary spheres, all of those different areas. But the children love the assembly and the feedback 2 years in a row. It's just been, they're just so happy to see themselves represented, and it means so much. So our assembly is really a celebration of culture, and I know next year when all these restrictions are lifted, we are going to go big. I know that for
Yes.
sure. It's going to be, we're going to hold, it's going to be our own Notting Hill carnival. I feel it. We're moving that way. I know that. So it's going to be great.
And you can imagine how the kids will receive that. I mean, for them to
Oh my
be,
gosh.
for them to give like really good feedback on an assembly, you can imagine how important it would be and how much it would mean to them to actually have a real life and vibrant celebration.
Yeah, and we've done that in our school, haven't we, Jen? We've done
Yeah.
cultural day, and it
Yeah.
was just amazing. We've had live music, we had, different zones where we tried different food. Like, we're really big on that in our school, celebrating culture. And so I know next year our kids, I don't even think we're going to have to do much of the work. I think our kids are going to form a committee and carry us.
Yeah. And I guess you sort of, I mean, you've spoken about like the importance, but why do you think it is important that, that it's shared with young people, that they know all about the Windrush generation, even students from all different backgrounds?
Yeah, my mum is Nigerian. She came to England in 1978. She was 16, from Nigeria. And so I guess when you see that Windrush story, I think so many of us from African and Asian backgrounds know our parents' stories are similar. So we
Mm,
see the echoes with that. So when we celebrate in Windrush, we're really also, as people from different ethnic backgrounds, celebrating our parents and our grandparents. But also for children that may not be African or Asian, even, it's also about going, okay, so this is why I see what I see around me.
yeah.
And it's about making sense of their current experience. But I also feel like Windrush is so important because of it takes that word, and it was specifically put in our assembly, immigration. It's such a, I don't even want to say the word hot topic. If I want to be honest, it's a dirty word.
Mm,
We don't like talking about immigration, or immigrants are always used as this kind of like, this, things to blame. We look at immigration and we know that politically it's kind of like, if you really want to secure jobs, votes, then immigration is the topic to kind of talk about and take a firm stance on. And I think celebrating Windrush helps our children to understand that immigration is good,
yeah.
immigration is positive, immigration happens because of relationships.
Yeah.
It is not a takeover. It is based on relationship. The Windrush generation came over because they saw Britain as the mother country.
Yeah.
They came over to do a service to the mother country. And they came over because many of them have served their mother country and risked life and limb. So when we celebrate Windrush, we are taking that word immigration and we are enlightening our children, and we are empowering them to talk about immigration in a positive way, which, as we know with Brexit, has been weaponized to be negative. And I
Yeah.
don't want our children growing up thinking that immigration is a bad thing, because immigration has brought so much good to this country. And
Yeah.
we're a global world, Genevieve. Like, we are global. And it's about time that we stop seeing our geographical boundaries as reasons to believe that we are different as human beings.
Yeah.
So
Fantastic.
I think it's important that I think it's important because it holds a mirror up. When we look at Windrush, we have to really think about how far we've come as a country in terms of race relations. We look at that
Definitely.
story of no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, and we have to really think how far we've come. Have we come far enough? If we just think forward now, as you were talking about, to the Windrush scandal, evidently not. And so I think Windrush Day holds a mirror up to what's currently going on with, I don't even like calling it a scandal, but the Windrush scandal. And it
Mm,
really forces us to really go, hey, Britain, like, are we really as progressive as we think we are? Are we really as accepting as we think we are? Have we done enough so far? Has, race relations acts and all of that, have we done enough? And I think for us as teachers, it really is thinking, well, what are we doing in our school to kind of cultivate that in the next generation? And as a history teacher, I just feel like Windrush is very much a part of our empire story.
Yeah.
It's the
And
modern day. They're here because we were there, basically.
Yeah, and I do think, just to add to that as well, I think that, you know, we have particularly in Croydon and in inner city areas, we don't just have students who are Black British Caribbean or Black British African. We have students who have, you know, recently migrated from Eastern Europe or countries in the Middle East, or, you know, we have such a large migrant community that it's important for them to be able to see those stories as well, and show that, you know,
Yeah.
regardless of where they're coming from, people have made all of these contributions to British society, and that's what they can do too. And it's not, like you said, it's not just a negative sort of, I guess, story that is being portrayed, or negative portrayal all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's the most important thing, really.
And I know I mean, you've you've been on the show a couple of times now, and so, you know, people who are listening may be familiar with you. They may know that you're a history teacher, but for any listeners who don't, she is a history teacher. She's a head of history. So Blessing, like, have you? I know that you've done a lot of work on decolonizing curriculum. You've done lots and lots of work, and you've done talks and CPD for other teachers. How have you, if at all, I'm sure you have, incorporated Windrush or, you know, post-war migration from, in particular, from the West Indies in your curriculum?
Well, actually, we're making a decision as to how to put that in now, because obviously COVID has changed a lot, and it's meant that we're behind where we want to be. But we do have several units that it links to, and actually we're trying to incorporate more local history into our curriculum. And actually Windrush fits really well. So our year eights currently now are looking at the Morant Bay Rebellion as, you know, kind of afterlife of slavery. You know, how far did life change for Jamaicans after slavery? And so actually I'm talking to the year eight teacher who's kind of overseeing that now, and I feel like we're looking at the legacy of British slavery, and actually Windrush is an extension of that story, because that's where the relationship with Jamaica comes from. So actually, we're considering putting it in the year 8 section, but then we're also considering putting it in our civil rights section. And I guess it could go anywhere, because we again, like, decolonizing the curriculum, we're turning away from America. We're no longer looking at America anymore. We're looking at Britain. We're looking at home. So the new slavery unit that we're teaching is purely, you know, we're just looking at Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica. We're looking at, you know, the British Islands. We're not trying to look over at America. So actually we've got loads of space, and we're making those changes now for Windrush. I do think we're going to put it onto the latter part of our slavery unit to look at the legacy of slavery and how Britain was changed positively because of, you know, relationships with Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and so on and so forth. So that's where we're looking to add it on now. And, you know, COVID hasn't been that kind to us, but that's where we think we're going to place it. And so our year 8 should get a look at that this year as well.
That sounds great. I might have to hire you for a personal tutor role, as in to tutor me, because whilst I know a lot of what you're talking about, it would still be good to hear you teach me, essentially. So look out for that, Blessing. I'm going to come right back to you, because I've got one more question, and we've got some feedback from people who have texted in. So the first point is, Sobia says, yes, we were invited over. Grandparents worked very hard to make new lives for themselves. And that's it, isn't it? It's all about the fact that we were invited over, and the reception that our grandparents received was far from pleasant, was far from warm or friendly. It was, as they say, a hostile environment. And Naomi said, immigrants are always made the scapegoats for deep-rooted problems in society, although in reality it is a beautiful thing. And again, that's exactly why celebrating it for me is such an important thing to do, because, and also use change in the language and talking about migration and migrants, as opposed to this, you know, negative term that is immigrants. that is used negatively. Blessing, I'm going to come back to you right after the news. So please,
I will hold on.
hold on. Please hold on. We don't want to lose you even just yet. Be right back with you. So stay tuned, please, listeners.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn. Bloomfield Collegiate School in Belfast is to enforce a restriction on pupils' use of mobile phones until the end of term. This will include use on site before school, in registration, and in classroom activities. Principal Guy Greer stated that they were acting over concerns about pupils' mental health and their ability to socialise. He said that these concerns stemmed from too much screen time during lockdown. He has received reports that there have been 30 minutes of absolute silence on school buses, as all of the students were using mobile phones, and he believes that they need to get students talking again. Northern Ireland's interim mental health champion, Professor Siobhan O'Neill, has previously said that some things that made life meaningful had been taken from children and young people due to lockdown and the pandemic. Research led by the University of Bristol has found that more than half of teachers in England are in favour of teaching children to take direct action against climate change. Professor Howard Jones believes that Greta Thunberg has inspired school children and that climate change is something they feel passionately about, despite being underrepresented in the national curriculum. He believes that with COP26 being hosted in Glasgow this year, in November, this is an ideal time to reflect on how we are preparing young people for the defining issue of today. Professor Ken Muir, former Chief Executive of the General Teaching Council for Scotland, will lead the work towards a new organisation to replace the Scottish Qualifications Authority. The Scottish Education Secretary, Shirley Ann Somerville, is to establish a Children's and Young People's Education Council to ensure that the voices of those most affected by any changes in education are always heard loudly and clearly. Ms Somerville has told MSPs that she wanted to be in a position to confirm central planning assumptions for the awarding of qualifications in 2022 for the start of the school term in August. This has been your daily education news briefing.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Genevieve Bent on Teachers Talk Radio.
Okay, good evening. Welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio. It's The Late Show with me, Genevieve Bent. Lovely to have you with me on this Thursday evening. Thank you to all listeners who have tuned in this evening, and particularly those of you who have texted in. I am actually joined by surprise caller Blessing, who is, she's doing wonderful things in her community, in her school. So thank you, Blessing, for joining me. We are talking about Windrush Day and the legacy of Windrush and celebrating that in schools. Tom did text in and said, how are you resourcing that, Blessing? And Blessing, I can see you've texted back. So primary resources for the new Black and British has provided lots of guidance and primary sources. And I know me and you have had lots of conversations regarding Black and British, whether that's the original, or the
kids,
child's one,
the children's
exactly.
version. And our kids actually read a lot of that. We actually do scan on parts of the chapter for their homework for them to read. But I just think any teacher who is a history teacher has to read Black and British,
Yeah.
just to get, not to, it's not about going, oh, I'm going to teach Black history. It just gives a comprehensive history. It's just things that you didn't know, like just things that, people have, Black people have been sending their kids to England for hundreds of years for an education. And
Mm.
I just think if you are a teacher, please, please, please get the audio, um, or buy the book. I've got both. I was taking notes. You should see my Black and British. It looks like my university book. It's ridiculous the amount of notes and post-its that are in it. But I think that has been my guiding light, and that enabled me to be able to actually make changes to our unit when we teach, our slavery unit, essentially, because we know that slavery did make Britain what it is today,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but as well in a powerful way as well.
Yeah. And, I'm not going to keep you much longer because I'm sure that you want to still listen to the show, of course, but get on
Of
with
course.
anything else that you want to get on with. But it's just, I was just reading an article earlier this week that came out on Windrush Day by Stephen Bourne. I'm sure you're familiar with him, the social historian. And he just talks about why Windrush is vital to, diversifying history in schools, and talks about the fact that, yes, celebrating Windrush Day is important, but also the legacy of it, in that people who stemmed from the Windrush generation made so many positive changes, in civil rights, in housing, employment, the NHS, etc. And that we often miss out the Windrush generation in classic history teaching, or what has been the standard teaching of history. I mean, there were some people that he mentions that, whilst I know about now, I didn't know about when I was at school. Would you
Mhm.
agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, love Stephen Bourne. He's actually done a couple of sessions for us, actually explaining his work and his research. So yeah, he's fantastic. He's a really interesting
Yeah.
person, and he's doing his best to kind of make sure that people that, like you say, we don't know about but should know about, are being talked about. And I think, Windrush is central to that, because you just have to look at the trajectory from Windrush and the changes, like you say, in houses, civil rights, legislation, employment rights, even, just so many things stem from Windrush.
Yeah.
And historians like, Stephen Bourne, I don't even know if he calls himself a historian, because he says he's not classically trained, not at all, in the way that others have been. But
Mm.
he talked about how, so much of his research, so many publishers wouldn't publish him. And that's another issue, just like people, we can have this wealth of information, but if publishing houses won't allow people to publish, then we can't disseminate that information. So even if people are hungry to know, which many people are, many educators are, it's not always out there. And it's so Tom asks in that question, well, blessing, how are you resourcing that? Again, it's through people like David Olusoga and reading that stuff. But again, David Olusoga is quite a popular historian, but there are loads of historians like Stephen Bourne trying to do the work of, he does amazing stuff, like looking at, LGBTQ community, just so many different things. But I do agree, and I think you'll see in our school, Genevieve, me and you talked about doing a wall, which we wanted to make a living wall of just people that we believe children should know.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that schools need to pick up on. And the other day I was having a clean out of my flat, and I bought these cards. Actually, they were actually a set of kind of Christian cards,
Mm.
kind of, and literally it was. And I sat with my daughter. It's funny, we were going through her stuff, and it was like, people that everyone should know. Genevieve, we went through this pack of cards. It was about 50 cards. There was one Black person.
Mm.
And so that is the issue that we're coming up against. Like, who is worthy of knowing, and who's deciding who is worthy of knowing. And we're not going to always get that from major publishing houses or from TV broadcasting networks. So it's up to us as educators to educate ourselves and to start telling our children who we believe is worth knowing, and diversify, like you say, diversifying those voices that are coming forward, because otherwise we end up in a very Western, very white world. And unfortunately, not all children can relate to that. And when they don't see themselves, they don't take up certain subjects. They don't take up history, and it's only really recently that we're seeing a massive uptake in STEM because of the work that people like you do, so yeah, really important to start seeing that representation, and Windrush is just such a great place to start, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. So Sobia has also texted in saying, I have a reading wall of diverse business people. Exactly. That's exactly what we want to achieve, really.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sobia, for that. Blessing, is there any last words that you have? I want to thank you for your time and thank you for calling in and surprising me. I love that. And of course, you'll get your mug. Tom has
I bet
promised
Genevieve.
now.
I bet Tom.
Anything that you want to leave us with?
I think the only thing, and I think me and you talk about this all the time, Genevieve, I just think the only thing for us as educators to do, and I know it's a long process and we've all got things to do, but I think culture, Windrush speaks to me of culture. And I think we as schools have got to start dedicating more time to culture, not just saying, oh, we're multicultural, but celebrating these days. So, I know me and you talked about Southeast Asian Day as well, or month, actually. It's a month, isn't it, to celebrate Southeast Asian history, and just more of the same. We celebrated Stephen Lawrence Day, and I just feel like we've got to grasp these days when they come, Women's History Month and all of these things, and use them as trajectory points or points to bounce off of for our children. And I think if we can do that really well as educators, then I think we're really going to inspire a generation that is open-minded and anti-racist, and I think that's what we really, really want. So that would be my final thought, if anyone's listening, to just really encourage your school. Like, you, Genevieve, you are someone who, I won't expose what you're doing. That expose sounds bad. I won't tell people yet what you have. That sounds really bad.
Expose me.
Okay, no more exposure, but I won't spoil. That's the word I was looking for. What you have in store for next year at our school, because you've got a couple of things lined up. And I just want to encourage people to look at your Twitter, because your Twitter is very active, and hopefully share with what we're doing in our school to celebrate more of these, these days. Give children something to look forward to, and start exposing them to different cultures, different people, different perspectives, different voices, and making room for that. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Blessing. Really appreciate your time, of course. Lots of lovely points that you've made and lots of useful tips and hints and those sorts of things. So thank you so much. I will get your mug to you.
Thank you. Better tomorrow. I want to see it.
Pressure. Bye. Bye. So thank you to Blessing, of course, who has gave up her time to join me once again. And you can see that she has, she sees the importance in it, not just sees the importance, but recognizes, how much of a contribution that Windrush has made, or the Windrush generation have made, and the legacy that it's created, and why it's so important for us to amplify those voices and share those stories. And just on the keeping sort of on the fact that, Stephen Bourne had written this article, he also mentioned someone called Dr. Harold Moody. Now, I don't know if anyone is familiar with Dr. Harold Moody. I talked about him in my last Black British History Month, Black History Month. So assembly for school. And he was someone that when I spoke to children and particularly students who, had felt quite drawn to the assembly, they talked about the fact that they told me that they hadn't heard of this person, Dr. Harold Moody. And he's so important to the Black British story, and he was Windrush generation. But I can't emphasize how important he was, because he was a doctor, and he was a Jamaican born doctor, physician, and a lot of people don't know him. So when we talk about Black history in the UK, traditionally it's been a lot of the civil rights story in the US, and we often, the people who have been part of the Black British story over here have often been forgotten, or sort of, I guess, just not very well known. Their work wasn't well known. And, Dr. Moody is one of those people, but he was so important in changing the course of British history, because he wasn't just a doctor. He was someone who, fought tirelessly for the rights of West Indian migrants. And And he started off as a family doctor in Peckham, but he was someone who was instrumental in finding proper housing for the West Indian community. He was someone who worked tirelessly to get employment and change the employment situations of the West Indian community. He was instrumental in that, the Race Relations Act in 1965. And I talked about the Race Relations Act in an assembly previously. And, that was all to do with finally, stopping or addressing discrimination, rather. I say addressing discrimination based on ethnicity or race or color or nationality. And he was instrumental to, so much in the building of Black communities in the UK during that Windrush and after that Windrush period. And many people just don't know his name, and they don't know how much work he did, along with, people like Paul Stevenson or Olive, who was, worked in the fight for women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights and civil rights in the UK. So there are so many people that have stemmed from Windrush that, have made such a difference to our society that we wouldn't be where we were, particularly someone from my background wouldn't be where I am without them. And Stephen Bourne, he talks about that and the fact that, Windrush is so important in getting to the root of where, where Britain has changed for the better post-war. So, yeah, so I just wanted to touch on that. And, I'm going to continue talking about Windrush, of course, but I'm also what I want to look at is resources and ways that Windrush is not just celebrated on Windrush Day, but actually post-war migration is taught and, where it's celebrated, whether it's in poems or literature or song. And Blessing talked about how important the music aspect of it was for some of the students who took part in the assembly this week, or not took part, but listened to the assembly this week, and just looking at how that can be showcased across the curriculum. So I'll be right back after our adverts.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davey-dyscalculia.co.uk. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsier puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website, www.cre8tiveresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TTRadio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers.
Okay, welcome back to the Late Show with me, Genevieve Bent. We are here discussing, I'm saying so much Windrush, that I can't even pronounce anymore. And we're discussing Windrush Day and the legacy of Windrush in schools this evening. I was joined by a very special and unannounced guest caller, Blessing Anori. And we've just sort of been discussing, you know, the importance of Windrush, why we think it's important from a personal and professional perspective. And just before the adverts, we talked about, I mentioned, you know, how to really make the best of Windrush across the curriculum and not just necessarily keeping it to Windrush Day, 22nd of June, of course, but actually how it can be used and taught and discussed across the curriculum and across the school. And, you know, some of the things or resources that I'm going to share with you, of course, you'll be familiar with, I'm sure, because they are very well known. And one of them, the one that I'll probably start with, I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, but this was part of my English class, my English literature class. So I wonder if there is anyone in the who's listening who can tell me what that might be. You get a round of applause, a special round of applause, if you do guess what that poem might be. It's related to the legacy of Windrush. But before that, I just wanted to sort of talk about where Windrush is taught now. And I know that migration, you know, is taught as part of Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. And I remember it being taught when I was younger, just touching on Windrush and what that meant and what the Empire Windrush you know, meant for the country. And I know that it still is in many, many, many classrooms across the country. But in 2013, the Minister for Education at the time removed the explicit references to Windrush in the national curriculum. So I wonder if if you know who I'm talking about, it was, you know, the MP who was responsible for the overhaul of GCSEs and A-levels as they were at the time. And when he was Education Secretary in the coalition government, he overhauled the whole national curriculum, as I said. But in February 2013, he actually removed something that I thought was, you know, just reflectively looking back at it, something that is very, very instrumental to the sequence of migration in, you know, well, particularly post-war in Britain. And, you know, in February 2013, the Department for Education, they did a draft about, you know, children should be taught the Windrush generation. They should be taught Commonwealth immigration. They should be taught the arrival of East African Asians, so Asians that, you know, from Uganda, and all about the Race Relations Act and other acts that were, you know, part of society at the time. But then later on in the year, the second round of consultations, the DfE actually removed that completely. They removed the specific explicit part of Windrush and removed it to it suggested they should be taught about social history and migration to and from Britain. So it was the explicit discussion of Windrush was removed from the national curriculum and placed with something that was a lot less explicit. You know, there was no mention of Windrush at all. And so it was really down to teachers and to schools to deliver that and make sure it was a part of their curriculum. And Blessing has texted in, it's the infamous Michael Gove. You know, I did say that people would be able to identify who that person was, who that MP was. And so, you know, since then, it's not been, you know, it's not necessarily an explicit part of the curriculum being taught, but it is, you know, I can't speak for most, I won't say most, but many schools do continue to celebrate its importance and do continue to teach it as part of migration. So with that said, I wanted to talk about the first resource. And this is not me, you know, I'm not creating anything particularly new. Many practitioners who are either listening or will listen back are familiar with these resources, but it's just about highlighting those. And even if you aren't a teacher, you know, ways that you can use literature and poetry and cookery and all those sorts of things to highlight express the importance of Windrush. And the first one is half caste. So I wonder if there's anyone who's listening who may want to text in, who remembers half caste. It was a yes. So Blessing, thank you for still being here as well, Blessing. She said she loves that poem. So half caste is a poem by John Agard, who is a Guyanese writer, a Guyanese poet. And he was born in 1949. So he was born in the British colony at the time, British Guyana. And he moved to Britain in the late 1970s. So he was part of the Windrush generation. He was part of that, I guess not necessarily Windrush generation, but definitely part of that post-war migration. Blessing is texted in saying, remember, it is part of our anthology. Exactly. Naomi said, I remember studying that poem at school. Exactly. Yeah. So it was part of the anthology, as part of the poems that you studied as part of English literature. Now, I wasn't a particular fan of English literature, but I've always loved reading and I like to write too. So this was one poem that always stuck with me anyway, because I don't know if anyone else was asked this, but I was asked, oh, can you do the accent? Can you do the accent? No, I can't do the accent. I'm really sorry. Meanwhile, knowing that I could. So it's hard. So he was John Agard, a poet who he himself was mixed race. And like I said, he came from British Guyana at the time. He himself has a strong Caribbean accent. So he migrated to Britain and he was part of that post-war generation and part of post-war society in Britain when it was a very hard and hostile time for migrants. And his mixed heritage included being both obviously African heritage, but also Spanish. And for those of you who know about the history of the West Indies and the Caribbean, we know that we're originally inhabited by, at least for Jamaica, Spanish people, indigenous Spanish people. So he wrote half caste. He wrote half caste to basically get back to people who, I guess, half caste has come with connotations and all sorts of negative histories stemming from, of course, slavery. And so he talked about being half caste, a term that we don't really use. We don't use now. It's politically incorrect, but being half caste, being mixed race, essentially, and what that meant and how he was perceived by society. And it was one of the best, my favorite poems from the anthology. Of course, half caste was a derogatory term, and he makes light of that. Talks about having one leg and being half caste, talks about Picasso painting and being half caste. And so he makes light of that, but whilst telling a story of identity. And that is, whilst it may not be initially looked at as being Windrush, I mean, it is. It is a story of identity. It's a story of not belonging. It's a story of society's perceptions and really turning that into beautiful poetry. And as a couple of you have texted in, you also remember, and that poem sticks with you. So that was just one. Blessing, I laughed during reading because you texted in saying, quote, no accent for you, you have to pay extra for that. Exactly, pay me and I'll do it. Yeah, no, I'm not doing the accent for you. I'm really sorry about that. And then the next one is, it's 9:01. Wow, time is just flying. The next one is Andrea Levy's Small Island. Now, I really, really hope that there are people listening or listening back to the show who have read Small Island, or if they haven't read it, are familiar with the story of Small Island. Now, Andrea Levy she passed away quite early recently, actually. She was an amazing, amazing, amazing writer. Has written many, many novels in her time, many of which are on my bookcase. And she's one of my mum's favorite writers. She's one of my favorite writers. Her novels are fantastic. They are so rich. They're so authentic. They talk from experience. There's so much you can say about Andrea Levy. She's got a Jamaican heritage, so You know, her father actually came on the Windrush, the Empire Windrush, to Britain. So she has that direct history in Windrush, essentially. You know, she is a part of the legacy. Danielle has texted in saying, I'm not an avid reader, but I loved Small Island. Hi, Danielle. I didn't even know that you were in the studio. Thank you for joining us this evening. Yes. So hi. So Small Island, I know that me and you discussed Small Island and how much you enjoyed it. I remember talking about that. And Blessing, you've said, went to watch the play at the National Theatre. Yes, I remember you discussing that and you have several of her novels. She is amazing. So she often tells a story of post-war migration from the West Indies. And she's got so many different, like I said, she's got so many different novels, and many of them are on my bookshelf. So she has got Fruit of the Lemon. She's got Every House in the Light Burning. She has got... do you know what? There's so many that I just can't even right now. But most of them tell a story about post-war Britain and post-migration Britain. But Small Island takes it to another level because she actually talks about Windrush, and she talks about the experience of Windrush from the eyes of someone who travelled on that ship, who travelled as a passenger, leaving their homes behind and coming to Britain. And the main characters, for anyone who is not familiar with the story, are the couple Hortense and Gilbert, who migrate from Jamaica to London. So it's a Jamaican perspective, and an English couple, Queenie and Bernard. And it's about not just the journey from Jamaica to Britain, but it's about the environment that, you know, that they, I guess, had to assimilate into, it not being what they expected, but also the relationships and the communication between themselves and this English couple that they end up living with. And so it's all about post-war migration, and also how it has been, romanticized over in Jamaica, because of course Britain was the mother country, the UK was the mother country, the Queen was the head of state, they were British colonies, so they were called over, as we know, and what they thought would be a welcoming, beautiful environment was actually completely different to what they received. And so Small Island explores all of that from firsthand, essentially. And what's great about it is it doesn't just tell the experience of, generically, it talks about it from a female perspective. And for anyone who is familiar with Windrush literature, it often has a male bias. It's often from the point of, you know, hardworking males who often left their families behind and came to Britain in order for better prospects and sent for their family back home, which is the case. You know, my grandparents did that. My grandfathers did that. They sent back for their family. But this is all about the female perspective and not just being a secondary character in the story, but being the main character, being the protagonist, being, you know, having the attention all on them. And Andrea Levy, like I said, she is part of the Windrush next generation because her father had travelled over on that. And so she really does bring the story to life. It's not just, you know, a story that you've come across and, you know, you read about it from time to time, but actually it gives you the feelings, the thoughts, the first-hand experience. You're really transported to what it was like at that time and the difficulties that they would have faced. And so Andrea Levy did many interviews and talks about, and I always say Andrea Levy, but I know that I think my mum pronounced it Andrea Levy, so apologies. But she always talks about the fact that her dad and her mum never really talked about migration. They talk, and that's quite familiar. So for anyone who explores the stories of Windrush, a lot of people from that generation don't talk about their lives back in Jamaica or back in Trinidad and Tobago or back in Barbados. You know, they don't talk about it because often, you know, reliving it is quite traumatic. And she talks about how when she was writing this book, it was about trying to get her mum to explore that and to not to relive it, but to allow her to form an identity with back home, essentially. And yeah, so this was the first time that Andrea Levy had written about migration directly to do with Windrush. So like I said, there were lots of other books that she had written before that. So she's been writing for a long time, from the 90s. And Every Light in the House Burning was probably one of the first books that I read, and it introduced me to her work. And the main character in that book was her father, who was a female whose father never talked about back home in Jamaica. Then there was Never Far From Nowhere, and there were sisters who never knew much about the Caribbean. And then there was Fruit of the Lemon, which was a really, really good story. And that was all to do with the main character, again, a female, just not knowing who she was and not knowing where her background was and where she came from. And she goes on a trip to Jamaica and just explores this whole new side of her that she never knew, and meets her family and lives as a Jamaican woman. But like I said, the Small Islands was the first time that you got to see a Black British perspective directly to do with leaving their home and coming to the mother country, and also the complex relationships and the socialization that had happened in Jamaica that had led them to think that the mother country was going to be, you know, everything and more, and it turns out not to be. So I'm aware that I'm doing a lot of talking, but for anyone who, you know, is, I guess you don't have to be an English teacher to be able to explore content like Small Island or the other books. It doesn't have to be just in English literature. There are opportunities to really explore this outside of those lessons, and whether it's in a debate club or whether it's in, you know, extracurricular or, you know, drama or art, or there are opportunities to be able to explore these literature like this outside of that particular classroom. So I just wanted to talk about that because Small Island is such a beautiful book, and Andrea Levy was such a beautiful writer. And, you know, it's important that her work and the legacy that she made isn't forgotten, because she, you know, she's, like I said, she was absolutely amazing, and her work just continues to be relevant to me, to, you know, to people in 2021 and hopefully in 2051. So yeah, Small Island, John Agard half cast, and you know, lots of Andrea Levy literature as well. We have got 20 minutes until the end of the show. I'm just going to play the news one more time. And before that, Blessing, you said, here I go on Amazon ordering more Andrea Levy books. Yes, I would say do that. I have my mum to thank for that, because she introduced me to, you know, her work and her novels when I was younger. And I've been able to continue, you know, I love reading. I've been able to continue that and hopefully continue that to the next generation too. But here's the news at 11 minutes past 9.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn. Bloomfield Collegiate School in Belfast is to enforce a restriction on pupils' use of mobile phones until the end of term. This will include use on site before school, in registration, and in classroom activities. Principal Guy Greer stated that they were acting over concerns about pupils' mental health and their ability to socialise. He said that these concerns stemmed from too much screen time during lockdown. He has received reports that there have been 30 minutes of absolute silence on school buses, as all of the students were using mobile phones, and he believes that they need to get students talking again. Northern Ireland's interim mental health champion, Professor Siobhan O'Neill, has previously said that some things that made life meaningful had been taken from children and young people due to lockdown and the pandemic. Research led by the University of Bristol has found that more than half of teachers in England are in favour of teaching children to take direct action against climate change. Professor Howard Jones believes that Greta Thunberg has inspired school children and that climate change is something they feel passionately about, despite being underrepresented in the national curriculum. He believes that with COP26 being hosted in Glasgow this year, in November, this is an ideal time to reflect on how we are preparing young people for the defining issue of today. Professor Ken Muir, former Chief Executive of the General Teaching Council for Scotland, will lead the work towards a new organisation to replace the Scottish Qualifications Authority. The Scottish Education Secretary, Shirley Ann Somerville, is to establish a Children's and Young People's Education Council to ensure that the voices of those most affected by any changes in education are always heard loudly and clearly. Ms Somerville has told MSPs that she wanted to be in a position to confirm central planning assumptions for the awarding of qualifications in 2022 for the start of the school term in August. This has been your daily education news briefing.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Genevieve Bent on Teachers Talk Radio.
Okay, good evening and welcome back to The Late Show with me, Genevieve Bent, on Teachers Talk Radio. If you are just joining the live studio, welcome. You can listen back at any time. Lovely to have you with me this evening. We have been discussing Windrush Day, its importance, and how we celebrate that in schools. And I've had a lovely special guest with me this evening, and that was Blessing and Ori. So thank you for calling in, Blessing, once again. We are coming to the end of this show, and I think it's been for me, I've enjoyed it because I love talking about this topic, and technically the day only comes around once a year. So for those of you who may have joined a little bit later, Windrush Day is the 22nd of June 1948. Okay, no, it's not. Windrush Day is the 22nd of June. And of course, that is because the Empire Windrush docked in the UK in Tilbury in Essex in 1948 on that particular date. And I know that many, most of the records will say about 492 people. But actually, when I remember doing a lot of research a few years ago now. And I remember reading that it was just over 800 people who actually called the West Indies or the Caribbean their home. So the last point was the Caribbean. And so actually, technically, official records have showed that it was around 800 people who were classed as West Indian or Caribbeans at the time. So it was a lot of people. And on the ship, there's about 1,100 people. So, it's a large percentage of West Indians coming over on that ship. So over the last sort of 15 to 20 minutes, I've just been talking about how, what the types of resources that can be used in not just in the curriculum, but extracurricular, and how we can really make use of the Windrush story and really amplifying voices and sharing the Windrush story with young people. And, it tends to be, for us, it's tended to be an assembly for the last couple of years in terms of lockdown, obviously, but I'm hoping, once we're back under normal circumstances, it will be a real celebration. of West Indian Caribbean culture, and allowing, you know, all sorts of people, all sorts of students, all the students from all different backgrounds to come together and celebrate, you know, the contribution that Windrush has made to modern Britain. And it's really important that that isn't forgotten. And another thing, I guess, that is sort of overlooked is that, you know, it's not just London. And it's easy for me as someone from London to be like, yeah, well, you know, London is the hub of West Indian culture or Caribbean culture. But it's really important to remember that West Indian migrants didn't just come and settle in London. They settled all over the UK. Obviously, they tended to stick to cities, but there are hugely large and vibrant communities, West Indian communities all over the UK, from Cardiff in Wales to Huddersfield in Yorkshire. And Huddersfield is where a lot of my family are, because one side of my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, settled in Huddersfield. So lots of my family is up there. I just happen to be from London, but Huddersfield, Leeds, Reading, Bristol, there are so many different, you know, large communities of West Indians and West Indian or Black British generations that reside in these communities. So it's not just London. And Blessing talked about Notting Hill Carnival, and lots of our students obviously working in Croydon. You know, Notting Hill Carnival is our, you know, it's our big thing here in London. And of course, it's the biggest carnival, the biggest street festival in the whole of Europe. But we would be doing a disservice if we didn't mention, you know, the impact that they have made in different communities. So, for example, my cousins who grew up in Huddersfield, you know, there is Huddersfield Carnival, which is massive for Yorkshire. There is Leeds Carnival. There is Reading Carnival, which is really, really popular. And so the impact is not just seen, their impact, the Windrush generation's impact is not just seen in London, but it's seen all over the UK. And I think that's very, very important to remember as well. So the last thing that I wanted to mention in terms of a resource was the Geraldine Connor Foundation. And you may or may not have heard of this foundation, but they are a registered charity. And they were established in 2012 to continue the work of Geraldine Connor. And they are really sort of passionate about bringing things to life and bringing global perspectives to life, whether it's through music or through theatre or through poetry. And they work directly with young people. And they actually have a Windrush learning resource, which you can download for free, whether it's to use in your classrooms or for those of you who are parents, whether to use at home. And it's a great resource because it's not just talking about it from an historian point of view, it's talking about it from an arts point of view, from a cookery, from music, all sorts of different things and ideas for cross-curricular work on the Windrush generation. And one part that I find amazing, and I will let you, I will do spoiler alert because I'm going to give you a little spoiler, but I will let you go and have a look for this yourself. That's the Geraldine Connor Foundation. One part is about food and drink. And for West Indian communities, that is everything. I can't tell you, you can't go to, and it will be the same for many different communities and cultures, but the West Indian community, we don't play when it comes to food, okay? And the students will agree with us. The students at my school will agree with this, but it talks about two particular staples that are popular in the West Indian community. And one is sorrel and one is black cake. And I don't know about anyone else, text in if you like these yourself, but sorrel, ooh, that's my drink. And black cake, ooh, that's my cake, okay? And you can hear me getting excited because, yes, okay, those are my two things, sorrel and black cake. Gabriella texted in saying, love me a black cake. Danielle said Christmas staples. I'm telling you, you cannot go through a Christmas period in our culture and not come across sorrel and not come across black cake. They are two very important staples in our community. And so the best thing about this, not just the fact that it talks about sorrel on black cake, but this resource gives you a recipe to make sorrel, a recipe for young people to go ahead and make sorrel. Okay, like I said, West Indian community, sorrel and black cake are two things that we don't play with. And I know a few people don't eat black cake, but it's part of the culture. And sorrel, so it's given a recipe that you can use with young people, and celebrate Windrush, okay, and celebrate the legacy of Windrush. So honestly, this resource is amazing. Like I said, it's free to download. They are a charity, so you can think about how, you know, you may want to contribute to them in some capacity. But the resource itself, as a teacher, as a parent, I'm not a parent, but as a parent, you may be interested. And certainly as a Black British West Indian, I'm definitely interested in this resource, just for myself, but also to share with young people. So I really, really, really recommend that one. So hopefully I've given you just a couple of ideas on this show on how you can utilize the story of Windrush and bring it to the forefront, whether it's this time next year or whether it's throughout the coming year or planning next year maybe. So we're coming to the end of the show. We really, really are coming to the end of the show now. And I know I've said that a couple of times, but like genuinely this time. And so, yes, I have really enjoyed talking about this, like I said, because it just means so much to me, from my grandparents' experience to, you know, my family, to the carnival, to sharing that with students. It's all a part of this big story, which is Windrush. And I just can't emphasize how much I feel, you know, it needs to be continued to be shared for years to come, and that it isn't forgotten. And I hope that 4 years later and 10 years down the line and 15 years down the line, it becomes celebrated for what it really is. And that's huge. So just a couple more things I wanted to share before I end the show. And these are, you know, for teachers, for parents, for people who work with young people. There are lots of things to take part in. So the Black Cultural Archives are an amazing resource, a hub which is down in Brixton. They are doing a Windrush special for young people, and you know, whether that's by themselves or in families, this Saturday. So down in Brixton in the daytime, that's for young people, so you can share that with your students. There's also the Migration Museum exhibition, which is moving to Lewisham. And I don't know how many people who are listening who are local, but Lewisham is where I grew up, and they are moving this Migration Museum and moving the exhibit. Not moving, but the exhibit is going to be in Lewisham. And I think it might already be there. I'm not 100% sure, but you can definitely go and check that out. And of course, that they are there and they are amplifying those migration stories, whether it's Windrush, whether it's Eastern European, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, all sorts of stories there. So recommend that as well. And I believe that's inside the shopping centre. So there's lots going on. There still is, even though the Windrush Day has officially passed, you know, it's never too late, and there is still lots and lots of things going on. So yes, share with young people, check it out for yourselves, and also think about what you're going to do next year. So that is it from me. I don't know if there's any last comments from any of our listeners who want to text in, but I want to thank you very much for joining me this evening. I hope that you have enjoyed the show. I hope that you feel that I've done this topic justice. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation between Blessing and I, and that you've taken away some tips and hints. I keep saying hints. It's not really a hint. It doesn't even make sense. Tips and tricks. Does that make more sense? To do with Windrush and celebrating Windrush Day. Khalil, welcome. Hi, Khalil. Lovely to have you with me this evening. And thank you for texting in. So Khalil is one of our hosts, one of my colleagues on Teachers Talk Radio. He hosts the Sunday lunch show. And he said, never thought I'd hear someone talk about sorrel on TTR. Well, I'm telling you, Khalil, you know, we're talking about Windrush, and sorrel is a big part of the community. So yes, I had to. And Danielle, thank you. You said texting in saying great show today. Jen, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Means a lot. Khalil, yes, exactly. So do join Khalil on Sunday lunch. He's there to take you through your Sunday afternoon. And that's it from me. Oh, Naomi, do I have a last minute caller? Oh, I'm not sure if that is a caller or not. But Naomi, if you do want to call, join me next week. And I would love to have you on, of course. Okay, that was a mistake. Thank you, Naomi. Right, good night from me. Have a lovely Thursday evening. Have a lovely rest of the week. Hopefully you get some rest over the weekend and we go again on Monday. Have a lovely rest of the evening, everyone. Good night from me.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.